Hey, thanks for clicking. This is Pal Saga. A man spends his whole life building something and then watches the person he trusted most try to tear it all down. But sometimes, justice comes from the last place you'd ever expect. Stay to the end. Let's get into it. My grandson was sitting in the back of the conference room when he slid the folder across the table. 17 years old. Still had his high school backpack with him, the one with the broken zipper he kept meaning to fix. My brother's lawyer stopped mid-sentence. My brother himself went the color of old concrete. And my grandson looked at me across the room with a calm that no teenager should have and said, "Grandpa, I think you should let me play these first." My brother lunged for the folder. His lawyer grabbed his arm. The notary public near the window quietly gathered her things and moved toward the door. And I realized, sitting in that conference room on what was supposed to be the worst afternoon of my life, that my grandson had been carrying something enormous for a very long time. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Walter. I'm 63 years old. I've lived in Dayton, Ohio my entire life, except for 4 years at Ohio State studying mechanical engineering and 2 years working for a firm in Columbus before my father called me home. Our family had owned a hardware and building supply store since 1971. My father built it from a single storefront on Maple Avenue into 3 locations across Montgomery County. When he passed in 2007, he left the business equally to me and my brother. I was 46. My brother was 39. For 7 years, things worked. I managed operations and supplier relationships. My brother handled finances and expansion. We were different men. I was careful, methodical, the kind of person who read contracts twice and kept paper records of everything. My brother was charming, fast-talking, the kind of person who could convince a supplier to extend credit on a handshake. We balanced each other out, or I believed we did. The first sign that something was wrong came in the spring of 2019. I was reviewing quarterly numbers and noticed a consulting fee listed as a recurring expense. $4,200 a month, paid to a company called Meridian Advisory Group. I had never heard of it. I brought it up to my brother over lunch. He waved it off. Said he'd brought on a logistics consultant to help us streamline our inventory system. Told me he'd mentioned it at a meeting months earlier, and I must have forgotten. I let it go. I was in the middle of negotiating a new supplier contract and didn't have the bandwidth to chase it down. I should have chased it down. The second sign came 6 months later. My mother, who was 79 at the time and still sharp but slowing down, mentioned to my daughter that she had updated her will. My mother owned 30% of the original Maple Avenue building outright, a separate asset from the business itself, property that had appreciated significantly over 50 years in a neighborhood that had gentrified considerably since 1971. Her mentioning the will update was not unusual. What was unusual was that she seemed confused about the details when my daughter gently asked about them. She said my brother had taken her to see an attorney. She said she had signed some papers. She said she trusted him to have handled it correctly. My daughter told me this over dinner one Sunday. I asked my mother directly the following week. She confirmed that she had updated her will but couldn't remember the name of the attorney or the specific terms. She seemed a little embarrassed about it. I didn't push her. She was my mother, and I didn't want her to feel interrogated. That was another mistake. I want to be clear about something. My brother and I had never been close in the way some brothers are. We were not enemies. We did not dislike each other, but there had always been a current of competition between us that started in childhood and never fully dissipated. I was the older one, the one who stayed close to home, who took over the family business. He was the one who had gone further in school, gotten an MBA, married a woman from a wealthy family in Cincinnati who had strong opinions about their lifestyle and stronger opinions about money. I had always sensed that my brother felt he deserved more than an equal split of something our father had built. I never thought he would actually try to take it. Everything came to a head in March of 2023. My brother called me into the main office one Tuesday morning and told me he wanted to buy me out. He said the business was at a crossroads, said he had investors interested, a regional chain that wanted to acquire all 3 locations, and that if I wasn't willing to modernize and grow aggressively, I was holding him back. He had a number ready. It was less than half of what my share of the business was worth by any reasonable valuation. I told him I wasn't interested in selling. He told me I didn't have a choice. He slid a document across the desk. It was a restructuring agreement. Dense legal language, 32 pages. He told me that based on a provision in our original partnership agreement, a provision I had no memory of, he had the right to trigger a compulsory buyout under certain business performance conditions. He said those conditions had been met. I took the document to my own attorney that afternoon. She read it and told me the provision in question had language she had never seen in our original agreement. She pulled the copy of the partnership agreement from her files, the one we had both signed in 2007. The provision was not in her copy. It was not in mine. It was in the copy my brother had presented, which he claimed was the controlling version. Somebody had altered a legal document, and my brother had been preparing for this for a long time. I didn't tell anyone except my attorney. Not my daughter. Not my mother. I went home that night and sat in my kitchen for a long time, looking at nothing. 35 years of work, 3 stores, a name that still meant something in Dayton. And my brother had apparently spent years building a trap around all of it while I showed up every morning and did my job. What I didn't know, sitting in that kitchen, was that my grandson had been paying attention. Marcus had always been a quiet kid. My daughter's son, 14 when this started, 17 by the time it ended. He came to the stores sometimes after school when he was younger, helping stock shelves, running the register during busy weekends. He knew the business the way a kid knows a place that's been part of his whole life. He also spent a lot of time at my house, particularly after his parents' divorce 3 years earlier, when my daughter needed extra support and my home became a second home for him. My brother had made a habit of using my kitchen table for phone calls when he visited my mother, whose house was 3 doors down from mine. He liked to walk the neighborhood in the evenings and end up at my kitchen, helping himself to coffee and making calls. He believed I tuned him out. Everyone believed Marcus tuned him out. Marcus had headphones in 90% of the time. What no one knew was that one ear was always listening. Marcus told me later that he started noticing things in late 2021. Overheard pieces of conversations that didn't add up. My brother talking to someone about document preparation. My brother's wife complaining that it was taking too long. My brother reassuring her that by the time I figured anything out, it would be finished and there would be nothing I could do legally. Marcus was 15. He didn't fully understand what he was hearing, but he understood enough to know that something was wrong. And he knew about recording because he was taking a media class at school and had asked for a decent digital recorder for his birthday that year. He started leaving it in the kitchen when my brother was around. He told me later that he wasn't even sure it was legal at the time. He just knew that words could disappear, that adults could deny things they had said, and that proof was the only thing that couldn't be argued away. He recorded for 14 months. I found out what he had when I came home one evening after the meeting with my attorney, looking exhausted and sitting at that same kitchen table staring at nothing. Marcus came downstairs, sat across from me, and put his recorder on the table between us. "I need you to listen to something, Grandpa." I looked at the recorder. Then, at him. "How long?" I asked. "About 1.5 years," he said. I wasn't totally sure what I was getting at first, but after a while it was pretty clear. He pressed play. My brother's voice came out of the small speaker, talking to a man I didn't recognize by voice, talking about what he called the document correction, about timing, about making sure everything was filed before I had a chance to get my own attorney involved. They discussed my mother. They discussed her cognitive state, which my brother described in clinical terms that made my chest tighten. They discussed a secondary amendment to her will that would redirect her share of the Maple Avenue property exclusively to my brother's family in the event of her death, bypassing me entirely. There was a second recording of my brother and his wife. She was asking about the timeline. He told her that once the business restructuring was complete and I was bought out, the property question would be simple. He used the phrase, "Walter will be out of the picture entirely, and it won't even look like we did anything wrong." There was a third recording that was the hardest to hear. My brother on the phone with someone, laughing about how I had never questioned him on the finances because I was, in his words, too trusting and too proud to admit he doesn't understand the numbers. He said I had been signing documents for years without reading them carefully. He said it had been almost too easy. I sat at that table for a long time after the recordings ended. My grandson sat across from me and didn't say anything, which was exactly the right thing to do. "There's more," he said finally. "A lot more. Different conversations, different people." I copied everything and kept the backups at school in my locker. "Smart," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "I didn't want to tell you until I had enough," he said. "I was scared that if I told you too early, you'd confront him and he'd find a way to make it go away. I needed to wait until there was so much that he couldn't explain it." He was 17, and he had understood, intuitively, the same thing that had taken me weeks to figure out with the help of an attorney. "What do we do now?" I asked. He looked at me the way my father used to look at me, level and calm and sure. "We let him finish setting the trap," he said, "and then we show him it was around the wrong person the whole time." The next 3 months were the hardest I have lived through since my father died. I had to sit across from my brother at business meetings and act like I was still considering his buyout offer. Had to watch him move forward with his plans, had to let him believe he was winning. My attorney was working behind the scenes, subpoenaing financial records, tracking the consulting company, which turned out to have been incorporated by my brother's wife's cousin, a name that appeared nowhere in any business disclosure. Meridian Advisory Group had collected over $200,000 from our business over 4 years. It was a ghost company that existed to funnel money out of the partnership. The forged partnership agreement provision was confirmed by a forensic document examiner. The paper stock did not match the original filing. The font had minor inconsistencies with period-accurate word processing software. Someone had created a document designed to look old, and it had been good enough to fool a casual inspection, but not a thorough one. My mother's updated will presented a more complicated situation. My attorney discovered that the attorney my brother had taken her to had a prior professional relationship with his wife's family. There were questions about whether my mother had been fully informed of the changes or had simply been guided through a signing process by someone she trusted. We prepared everything, every recording, every financial record, every forensic report, and we said nothing. My brother scheduled the final meeting for a Thursday afternoon in June. His attorney had sent over the final buyout documents. My brother clearly expected me to either sign or make a futile last-minute objection that his lawyer would dismantle. He had the documents. He had his version of the partnership agreement. He had complete confidence. He did not know that Marcus had taken the day off school. He did not know that my attorney had arranged for a notary and a court reporter to be present, which he had been told was my precaution as the party being bought out. He did not know that my daughter was in the building. The meeting started normally. My brother's attorney presented the documents. My attorney raised several objections. My brother sat at the head of the table looking like a man who had already won. His wife was not there, but I knew she was waiting for his call. Then Marcus set the folder on the table. My brother saw him for the first time and frowned. "What is he doing here?" "He has something relevant to the proceedings," my attorney said. Under Ohio recording law, a party present in a conversation has the right to record that conversation without the knowledge of other participants. Your client has been present in numerous conversations over the past 14 months. My brother looked at Marcus. Then, at me. Something shifted in his face. "Grandpa," Marcus said, "I think you should let me play these first." My brother's hand shot across the table toward the folder. His lawyer grabbed his arm, and that is when the notary near the window quietly moved toward the door. We played 8 recordings in that conference room. 1 hour and 40 minutes of audio. My brother's voice, his wife's voice, the man from Meridian Advisory, the attorney who had handled my mother's will amendment. Conversations spread across 2 years, documenting in their own words what they had done and planned to do. My brother tried to speak after the second recording. His attorney told him to stop talking. After the fourth recording, his attorney asked for a recess. My attorney declined. After the sixth recording, my brother's attorney gathered his files and told my brother quietly that he could no longer represent him in this matter. By the time the last recording finished, my brother was sitting with his hands flat on the table, not looking at anyone. "I want you to know," I said, and it was the first time I had spoken directly to him in the entire meeting, that I am not doing this because I stopped loving you. You're my brother. I have known you for 56 years. I paused. I'm doing this because what you were about to take wasn't just mine. It was Dad's, and you knew that better than anyone. He didn't answer. He left without speaking. The next months were not simple or clean. Nothing like this is. My brother was referred for criminal investigation on multiple counts, including document fraud, embezzlement, and elder financial exploitation related to my mother's will amendment. The Meridian advisory situation alone represented a significant financial crime. His attorney was eventually cleared of direct involvement but faced his own bar inquiry regarding the will amendment. The forensic audit of our business finances, once investigators had access to the full records, revealed that the amount diverted through Meridian and other mechanisms was closer to $340,000 over 4 years. My share of those diverted funds, money that should have been partnership income or reinvested in the business, was the equivalent of everything I had planned to put toward my retirement in that window. My brother's wife had been a knowing participant in the financial scheme. She faced separate charges. The will amendment was invalidated. My mother's estate attorney cooperated fully once the situation became clear. My mother, when my daughter carefully explained what had happened, was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, "I thought he was helping me," she cried. I held her hand and told her none of it was her fault, because it wasn't. She was a woman in her 80s who had trusted her son. He had used that. My brother entered a guilty plea 14 months later on 3 of the 7 counts. He was sentenced to 4 years, eligible for parole after 2. The business was restructured under my sole ownership following a court-supervised buyout that used the actual valuation, not the number he had invented. The Maple Avenue property remains in the family estate as my mother intended when she wasn't being guided by someone who wanted to take it. I drove Marcus to his college orientation in August, 2 months after the settlement. We loaded his boxes into his dormitory room at Ohio State, the same school I had gone to, the same campus I had walked with his grandfather's generation ahead of me. He was studying business. Of course he was. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" he asked as we walked back to the truck. "Getting there," I said. "Some days are harder than others." We stopped at a bench near the center of campus. I sat down because my knee had been bothering me, and he sat beside me, long-legged and still, looking out at the students moving across the quad. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Sure. Did you ever think about just telling me earlier? In the beginning, when you first started suspecting something?" He was quiet for a moment. "Every day," he said. "Especially at first." I didn't sleep right for months after I started recording. I kept thinking, what if this is wrong? What if I'm misunderstanding? What if I tell Grandpa, and it turns out to be nothing, and then there's this whole family disaster for no reason? But you didn't. No. He paused. Because one night I was lying in bed, and I remembered something you told me when I was little. We were working a Saturday at the Maple Avenue store, and I had made a mistake, put the wrong SKU stickers on a whole rack of fasteners, and I was upset about it. And you said, the difference between a problem and a crisis is whether you have a plan when it matters. I remembered saying something like that. I did not remember him remembering it. So I decided I wasn't going to bring you a problem, he said. I was going to bring you a plan. I didn't say anything for a while. You carried that alone for over a year, I said finally. That's a heavy thing for a kid. You worked 6 days a week for 35 years building something, he said. 14 months of listening felt fair. I put my arm around his shoulders the way I used to when he was small enough that he fit under my arm naturally. He was bigger than me now, had been for a couple of years, but he leaned into it the same way he always had. What you did, I said. I don't have the words for it. You don't need words, he said. You just need to stop working 6 days a week. I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed genuinely in months. It came up from somewhere deep and unexpected, and it felt like something loosening. I drove home alone that afternoon. The house was quiet in the way houses are quiet when they've shifted from a before to an after. My daughter was coming for dinner. My mother was doing well, considering everything. The business was mine now, fully and cleanly. And I had already started talking to a manager I trusted about taking over day-to-day operations, so I could step back without stepping away entirely. My brother would be in a minimum security facility for at least 2 years. His wife had moved back to Cincinnati to live with her family. The life they had constructed, the vacations, the house they had been quietly upgrading with money that had partly come from mine, all of it was gone. I did not feel satisfaction about that exactly. But I felt something, a kind of rightness, the sense that something that had been badly tilted had been set level again. He wrote me a letter 3 months into his sentence. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope and almost didn't open it. But I opened it. It was 2 pages. Most of it was justification, how the business hadn't been growing fast enough, how he had felt trapped in my father's shadow his whole life, how his wife had pressured him, how it had started small and then he was in too deep to reverse course, the usual architecture of a person explaining why the thing they did was actually understandable. But at the end, there was 1 paragraph. He wrote that he knew he had crossed a line he couldn't cross back over. He wrote that he had told himself for years that I was comfortable enough that the money didn't matter, that I would be fine either way, that he deserved more because he had worked just as hard with less recognition. He wrote that sitting in a cell with nothing but time had shown him how completely he had convinced himself of things that were not true. He wrote, "The business was Dad's. You were right about that and I couldn't face it." I read that paragraph several times. Then I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and put it in the drawer of my desk rather than throwing it away. I'm not sure why. Maybe because it was the first honest thing he had said to me in years. Maybe because I'm 63 years old, and I've lived long enough to know that people are rarely only one thing. And my brother, who had done a genuinely harmful thing to me and to our mother, was still the boy who had followed me around our father's store as a child. Still my blood, still someone I had 30 years of ordinary memories with that none of this could entirely erase. I haven't responded to the letter. I may never respond, but I haven't thrown it away. There is one more thing. 2 weeks ago, Marcus called me from campus. He calls every Sunday, which I did not ask him to do and which means more to me than I know how to say. "Grandpa," he said, "I want to ask you something." "Go ahead." "My business professor wants us to write a case study about a real business and a decision that either saved or nearly destroyed it. Can I use our story? Changed names and details, obviously, but the structure of it." I thought about it. "What angle would you take?" I asked. "The decision point," he said. "The choice between acting early with incomplete information versus waiting until you have enough. Most people act too early and blow it or don't act at all. The interesting case is when someone has the patience to build the full picture before showing their hand." I smiled into the phone. "You can use it," I said. "Thanks, Grandpa. Also, I'm coming home for fall break. Can we go to the Maple Avenue store? I want to see how the new layout is working." "It's your store, too," I said. "Whenever you want." I hung up and sat in the quiet of the kitchen where my brother used to make his phone calls. The same table, the same window, the same late afternoon light coming through. Different now, cleaner, somehow. My father built something. I spent 35 years tending it. My grandson spent 14 months protecting it. Some things are worth holding on to. And some people show you that when you needed to see it most. If you're watching this and you have someone in your life who has been protecting you quietly, who has been paying attention when they didn't have to, who has been carrying something heavy without telling you, I hope you take a moment to tell them you see it. Not everyone who saves you makes a noise about it. Sometimes they just sit down across from you at a kitchen table and put a recorder between you and say, "Grandpa, I think you should hear this." If you stayed until the end, go ahead and like this video. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that honesty, even when it takes a long time to arrive, always arrives eventually. And if you're going through something that feels impossible right now, remember, the truth is the only thing that can't be taken from you. Make sure you're standing on it when it counts.